So, before proceeding to the video itself, I'd like to apologize that it's not really a usual lore video, but rather something like a brief addition to my previous video about the Ringed City DLC. The thing is that already after I released my previous video I found out that some peculiar things were revealed in the recently released Dark Souls 3 design art book, and so I'd like to discuss them in this short video, which however, shouldn't really be considered separately from my previous video. And I'd also like to use the opportunity of this video to discuss some of things I had to skip in that video. But anyway, sorry for this boring intro, and let's finally get to the intriguing stuff. Namely, a more detailed version of artwork of Princess Filianore that we've seen earlier, but in worse quality. Most peculiarly, we can see that the embraced shell in the artwork differs from what we see in the game, as it depicts some crystals inside of it. And the darker crystals that seem to surround the center of the egg actually appear to be very similar to the transposing kiln, a device used in the forbidden art of transposition of twisted souls into unique items, which is said to be made of crystal lizard's hide. So it seems that at some point Filianore was supposed to actually hold a transposing kiln inside of the embraced shell, which could possibly be even related to the changes the world undergoes as we break it. As we can see the bright white light breaking out from the shell and swallowing everything around, revealing the ruins amidst vast ashen desert with silhouettes of familiar castles in the distance as it fades away. But, at the same time, not much seems to start changing until Filianore, whose eyes are apparently surrounded by dark veins, is awoken. So, after all, the world's change seems to still be related to the interruption of Filianore's slumber. And, despite of how interesting it might appear, I guess that we should note that the transposing kiln inside of the shell is depicted only on the artwork, while in-game this shell appears to be pretty much empty. Thus it seems that certain change in the concept could have taken place between the creation of the artwork and the final release. And, it wouldn't be really something new to Dark Souls. For example, the artbook of Dark Souls 1 revealed that Andre was once supposed to be Gwyn's descendant and unlock a passage by moving a statue in Filianore Shrine in order for the player to progress. Or, that artbook also revealed that Priscilla was once supposed to be something what the Firekeeper is to the player in Dark Souls 3. So, of course, we should consider what we find in the game first, as the things on concept artworks might actually reflect things that were altered in the final release. Actually, we've already discussed the difference between Shearer and Woman from the artwork depicting Shearer's gear we saw earlier. And, in this particular case, the egg seems to be empty in the game. Yet, an artwork depicting Filianore with something that appears to be similar to a transposing kiln still appears to be quite peculiar nonetheless, as the thrones of the pygmy lords that we may find after breaking the shell and awaking Filianore actually seem to be somewhat reminiscent of the throne of Lord Ludleth the Calland we see in the Filianore Shrine. And, in fact, it's Ludleth who conducts the transposition for us, being a former student of this forbidden art somewhat associated with his lost homeland of Calland. And the similarity of the thrones itself appears to be very intriguing, especially given some old speculations about Ludleth we discussed in some old videos. However, we should note that despite the general similarity, the thrones actually differ in some details, like the height of armrests and seat, which appears to be greater on Ludleth's throne, possibly to emphasize how small he was for the role he had taken upon himself. So, generally the proportions of thrones parts appear to differ between the pygmy lords and Ludleth's thrones. And, unfortunately, we still should never forget to mention the possibility that the similarities could be never intended to bear lore-wise meaning, though, I guess it's not that likely in this case. But, let us return to the discussion of the more detailed version of Filianore's concept artwork. Aside of a ring of darker crystals that appears similar to a transposing kiln, in the center of the embraced shell we may also see something that appears to be a larger crystal of some yellowish color. And I guess it's quite interesting, as this crystal may actually be related to the young grass dew gems bestowed upon Filianore's spears of the church. Though, speaking of yellow gems, we may recall the lightning gems said to be found in aftermath of dragon hunts, which may appear rather curious if the embraced shell is indeed a dragon egg. Though, of course we shouldn't forget another peculiar thing regarding the embraced shell, as I believe that many have noted its interesting similarity to vagrants of Dark Souls 1. Basically, vagrants were rather cool creatures that appeared in players' world carrying some items, or humanity, lost by another player in their world. So, this possible similarity to the embraced shell indeed appears to be very peculiar. But, returning to the yellow, or possibly even golden crystal on Filianore's artwork, we may recall golden crystal golems once used by Seth the Scalers to seal and carry items, and even living creatures, inside of them. Which may also be quite interesting, as among Filianore's knights there is a character, who as we discussed in previous videos, seems to be related to Seth. Although, the yellow crystal is still shown only on the concept artwork, while, for some reason, the shell is empty in the game. And so let's now proceed to the discussion of another peculiar thing about the embraced shell, not related to Filianore's concept art. Basically, it was also noted by YouTube user Alexandro in his comment to my previous video, in which he wondered about similarities between the embraced shell and the wall encircling the ringed city. So, quite literally, ringed city is surrounded by a circle of mountain wall. And from the stone-humped hag's dialogue we may even speculate that this wall was in fact somehow raised by the gods, in order to isolate the pygmies who took the dark soul at the very end of the world, leaving however, a wide breach for the sunlight to reach the ringed city. And, as a side note, I actually like this possibility as it's slightly reminiscent of J.R.R. Tolkien's Valar, who raised pillory mountains to protect the blessed realm of Man. Returning to the ringed city however, we may note that the embraced shell has a large hole on its upper part and a single breach going down from it, which may be speculated to be somewhat reminiscent of the ringed city's mountain wall with its sunlight gap. And it may be quite peculiar, given the consequences we face when the shell is broken and Filianore's awoken. However, it seems that the proportions of the breaches of the shell and wall seem to be different, with sunlight gap being somewhat wider and way deeper. And, although some peculiar similarities can be noted, the spherical shell hardly seems to be a model of sorts of the ringed city's mountain wall. But, let's proceed to a couple of more topics that I had to skip in the previous video, as it turned out to be way longer than I expected, and I also felt a lot of pressure of responsibility before those who have liked its snippets I released as I worked on the video, though frankly speaking, now I feel even more of such pressure, lol. But, anyway, let's get to these topics. Basically, they're more like some first impression things I liked on my very first playthrough, but I'd still like to mention them and I hope that they won't be totally boring to you. And the first thing is quite obvious really, but I liked it nonetheless. So, although we may find some Herald Legion knights in the ringed city, I guess it pretty much may be speculated that they didn't actually arrive there on their own, but rather failing in their quest and sinking into the abyss, they appear in the ringed city rising from the abyssal swamp that has apparently swallowed some of its streets. Thus, it seems that Herald Knights actually reached the ringed city in a way, somewhat similar to how the Dragon Slayer armor appeared in the abyssal swamp, where it once again became possessed by the memory of hunt, and, apparently, slew quite a few Herald Knights it met in its urge to hunt. And, another thing I wanted to mention in my previous video, but had to skip it to keep it a little shorter, is also related to the abyssal swamp. So, we may note that white-faced locusts who arose from this abyssal swamp have some insect wings on their backs. And these wings actually seem to be slightly similar to smaller insect wings we may see on the pilgrim butterfly angels. Well, of course they may be not really much related lore-wisely, as both creatures seem to be quite insect-like. But, to me it appeared quite curious, for, could it be that this similarity is rather a manifestation of that kinship between humans and locusts mentioned by the white-faced preachers? As the angels actually seem to be born of deceased pilgrims. And, I guess that would be it for now. Thanks for watching, and I apologize that this video is rather a short addition to my previous video and maybe it was less interesting. Frankly speaking, I myself hate to make things that may disappoint my viewers. But I felt that I must discuss some of the new stuff discovered in more detailed concept artwork images and also use the video to discuss a couple of things I had to skip earlier. I just couldn't ignore it. And even though I couldn't rest until I made a video about it, I still doubt whether should I publish the video even as I write these lines. So, once again, thanks for watching. I hope that the video wasn't totally boring to you, and I also apologize that it's only a short video. But maybe you like to check out other of lore, etymology or cosplay videos on my channel if you haven't seen them yet. Also, you can check out the video description for a link to the etymology video's table of contents, if you're interested in this topic, as it's meant to make it easy to find the discussion of the necessary names.